Hello and welcome to Bloomberg News. I have with me Department of Economic Affairs Secretary Atanu Chakraborty and Secretary Expenditure TV Somanathan. Mr. Chakraborty and Mr. Somanathan, welcome to Bloomberg News. I'll start with you, Mr. Chakraborty. The budget is coming in at a time when growth is at an 11-year low. We've had the issue of generating enough jobs for an economy like India. India has lost the tag of fastest growing economy in the world. In all this context, do you think the budget contains enough to sort of kickstart the cycle?
Well, our expectation every time is many times very proximate as to you look at what happened recently or what happened last quarter. Whereas budget looks at, this budget is a forward-looking budget. If you see the statements made, and that's how the budget had been built up. This budget is also meant for boosting investment, and it's also for enhancing the purchasing power. So this is the context. So when it talks about forward-looking, it's also talking about laying a roadmap to next 5 years or 4 to 5 years, and talks about reform also. And if you see large number of paragraphs, the statements relate to the reform measures. It has talked about boosting the consumption, enhancing the purchasing power, direct tax cuts that have come should make many people happy, and of course there's a very large measure of investment side push, which are also linked to the market and youth on the other side. So which is the sort of constituency today is available, not in the political sense but in economic sense, because what we call about a demographic dividend, we have to make use of it, and then ensconced in technology. So that is the context in which the budget came up, and that is the direction in which it is taken.
So the markets were expecting the government to push forward the fiscal levers a little more, in terms of you would possibly be slightly more adventurous in terms of when it came to spending, because a lot has been said that the government has to take the lead in terms of kickstarting expenditure. The private sector is not there. Once you take the lead, possibly they will kick in. Was there a constraint that you worked in under?
See, we were seeking a balance. On the one hand, we were seeking to increase expenditures where obviously it was good value to increase it, capital expenditure particularly, but also expenditure in sectors where it would help boost the economy, it would help disadvantaged segments, etc. So that is one objective. At the same time, I think we also have to bear in mind that we need to be prudent, because increasing expenditure with no regard for prudence would not be the right thing to do, even in a situation like this. So what we've tried to achieve is we have an increase in expenditure this year, which is on the budget, is more than 11%, as against a projected nominal GDP growth of 10%, and in spite of a very difficult revenue situation caused partly by the tax cuts and the growth rates and so on. So in spite of constrained revenue, expenditures are more than keeping up with nominal GDP growth, number one. Number two, within that, the composition has changed in a very positive direction, in the sense that capital expenditure estimates in this year's expenditure budget have increased by twice the average rise in expenditure. So you will see a 22% increase in capital expenditure, whereas the overall increase in expenditure is half of that. So that's where we have tried to prioritize things that are growth inducing, things that are going to help the economy, but not all expenditure necessarily helps the economy. So we've prioritized, and we've tried to maintain fiscal prudence so that we do adhere to a glide path for long-term sustainability. So we have to balance the short and the long, and that's the balance that we have sought to achieve here.
The 0.5%, this is a question to both of you, the 0.5% deviation in the deficit target, given the fact that we haven't kept to our revenue numbers in past couple of budgets, maybe it's also because of difficult economic situation. Do you sense the international community, especially the rating agencies and investors, would take kindly to this? Is that something like Mr. Somanathan was saying, that it's a need of the hour, you need to slightly, expand the deficit?
What we have
deviation
done, the deviation is very much given in the book. The FRBM Act provides for it. Secondly, the deviation is not flinging about money, but money being spent very, very cautiously, very targeted measure. Number three, the return path has been specifically stated. And the cause of it is very credible, very strong, and and in a sense, the reason for which the deviation has been taken is also towards pushing up long-term growth or medium-term growth, let me put it this way. Therefore, if you see that kind of a backdrop, I do not see a problem with external agencies. However, I see they should be happy with it that we did something which caused certain issues in short term, and then we have come back to it. So issue is perhaps would be more of correct messaging than not being on the same page, if I use that term.
Issue of credibility of numbers.
Credibility of numbers.
Because
Yes.
you had revenue collections which you would assume double digit, and you would end up the year with possibly.
I think this year, I mean, I don't think anybody would say that a 10% nominal growth estimate is not credible with the present growth and inflation rates. The revenue estimates, if you look at what they are for the current year and look at how they're projected out for next year, they align very well with the nominal growth rates. So I think the credibility of the revenue estimates is excellent. If you look at the expenditure estimates, we have projected an increase of, as I said, more than 11% on the expenditure side, in spite of all the constraints. And we have also responded to the various comments about where are which numbers. So this time we've consolidated all the numbers and put them into an annexure to the budget speech, where you can see all the extra budgetary resources that the government of India is responsible for. That is where the government of India is responsible for the principal and interest. Every one of those has been listed in the budget speech. The minister made a reference to it in her speech. So I think we have very credible numbers. We have all the numbers are out there. I mean, it's for the user, the reader to use those numbers. But the numbers are all there, and none of them, in my view, are not credible. A lot of attention has been paid to the credibility of the numbers.
So one more question about this deviation. It's just a deviation. It's not an escape clause where an RBI can directly buy bonds from the government?
No, the FRBM Act prohibits RBI subscribing to Government of India bonds. We do not do that as per the law. Whenever government has no other means, it goes to the market and borrows, which is known as classically known as the market borrowings. Therefore, we make use of various means for borrowing. One is the small savings, which is like in the public account, which is many people do not understand properly that we have a consolidated fund of India, and there is a public account where a lot of funds lie, which are used for a specific purpose, have their own means of moving, and they have nothing to do with, they do not move in and out of consolidated fund. So one of them is also a small saving fund. So whenever it's taken into consolidated fund to do something or given to somebody, it is then accounted as if it's a loan. So it's a borrowing then. Then it's a borrowing as if.
There's no direct borrowing from the RBI.
There's no
There is
or
no.
from the markets.
Yeah.
So these extra budgetary resources are not a call on market
NSSF,
borrowings.
yeah.
They are not a call on RBI either.
Yeah.
They do not crowd out external borrowings, that is the borrowings in the market. So the amounts remain available to the private sector to invest, borrow and invest. These amounts are available in any case. They would have been fighting to get invested somewhere else. For example, NSSF would have gone to NTPC.
Yeah.
Instead, FCI borrowed it. No.
One last question on credibility. To disinvestment receipts about 2 trillion or 2 lakh crore rupees. We haven't achieved those kind of numbers, and a lot of your spending would be dependent on that. And you have LIC, you have Air India, and you have BPCL. So three big ticket, and possibly at some point coming into the market. One is an IPO.
Again, I mean, I'm sure Secretary DEA will have more to say, but if you look at the numbers have also been broken down this time into two components. There's a component for the regular disinvestment, and then there is a component for the financial sector. So So the regular component, again, if you look at the amount of preparatory work, as in the press conference, the finance minister was saying that a lot of preparatory work has been done. The results are unlikely to feed into this financial year by March 31st. They're likely to slip over into the next year. So next year you'll actually get the fruits of a lot of hard work that's been done this year.
But that's
And
a
then
hard stop deadline. March 31, 2021 is a hard stop deadline for asset sales for these three companies.
I wouldn't say that, but I don't know. You'd have to ask my colleague, Mr.
No, because
Pandey.
it's been going on from the past year. So assuming you've done a lot of hard work,
BPCL was not announced before it was announced the last budget.
Yeah.
So it's not been
BPCL is
going on.
very recent.
It's a recent announcement.
And
I'm saying 2021, March 31, 2021.
yeah, I'm saying BPCL is a recent announcement, and they are on verge of taking the UI out. So they have moved pretty fast. But if you see a company of that size, does take time. And Air India is not a very easy organization to sell. Perhaps one of the most difficult right now available to Government of India to sell. However, they have unbundled it, brought it out, and the manner in which I saw the responses, I find that, especially in the press, that was the only means available to me for that, and possibly Secretary Disinvestment will talk to you at much greater length. I guess they are ramping it up pretty fast, and you should see a lot of results. See, disinvestment is a lumpy receipt.
Yeah.
So while we do figure it out for every year, they do plan it out. But it does happen that it may fall on the either side of March 31st. It could happen.
Yeah. On that optimistic note, thank you.
Thanks very much.
City Union Bank